So Tel, we're back on the boat. Last time we were on the Lady Pearl, we were just wrapping up on your summer of Thames carping. But it's a slightly different location now, isn't it?
Yeah, she's not in the water now, unfortunately. She's back home in the garden. You want a brew?
Yeah, I'd love one, thanks mate. Well, I see she's not covered in pot plants yet, mate, so you haven't retired her, have you?
You're having a laugh, aren't you? Basically, she just needs some work, do you know what I mean? Like, she hadn't been out of the water in 12 years. If you look underneath, she's just covered in a colony of zebra mussels, all dried up now and crusty. And that's the thing, when you take a boat out of the water, you're best off cleaning it straight away. It's just a little tip for anyone else who takes it out. I haven't, and I'm looking at, I've probably got to buy 2 or 3 sanders, and do you know what I mean? I've got to buy all the tools and that. I've got a lot of work. She needs new windows as well. So yeah, it's a winter project, and I'm quite looking forward to it, really.
So the cherry on the cake of that Thames campaign, Tel, was that lovely linear. That must be, what, 18 months ago now? What have you been up to since?
It feels longer, doesn't it, you know?
Look at that. Back you go.
Yeah, oh, there was a few nice ones and all, remember, on the Thames. I think in the video I said, oh, he was the best one, but there was a few nice ones. It was a lovely bit of fishing. I think that would have been sort of end of September time, so it was sometime September, I think, that linear. That's it, yeah, we had quite a lot of rain, and the Thames went in flood, so it's sort of, because I was intended fishing for the barbel, if you remember. There was a couple of big ones there, but I wrapped it up earlier than intended. I don't know if you remember Littleton South on the tunnels? Well, you had 2 lakes there, didn't you? That was what the tunnel separated. You had Littleton South and Littleton North. And Littleton North was the bigger one that was more coloured. Well, after wrapping it up in the Thames, I went and had a couple of trips there. And the main reason was Embryo Angling, who had the lease on it, they were losing the lease. There's no fishing on there now. In fact, worse than that. That lake there where we filmed the tunnels film on the south, all those fish are now dead. Algal blooms sort of done them all, you know. The 2 or 3 waters went the same year, didn't they? The Big S as well, awful. But at the time, yeah, the lease was running out for embryo. It was autumn time. I think the lease was running out in December. So we thought, right, me and my mate Owen went over there and had a couple of trips. More than anything, just trying to winkle a carp or 2 out before the fishing finished, you know. And I got lucky. You know, it was just a bit of a one-off trip sort of thing, you know, but I caught 3. It was that time of the year, it was off the shallows where I was fishing. There's a lot of bream and roach in that lake, especially if you're fishing in the deeper water. But I fished on the shallow ground, the bream wasn't so bad. Winkled 3 out, but the downside of it was at that time of the year it was short-lived. You know, within a week or so of that, they wasn't in the shallow water anymore. I think it would have carried on and done a little bit more over there. But the weather sort of put a stop to it. But of the 3 I caught, one of them was a good one for there, a 32-pounder. Quite a pale fish, but the water's coloured, you know, whereas on the South Lake it was crystal clear, so the fish always had that aged look to them, you know, dark and that. But they're just the same age in the north side, which is coloured, except the coloured water means they're a little bit paler. But real nice old carp, slope-eared on them, bit of a wrinkly tail, big overslung mouth and that, corker. So yeah, that was a lovely bit of fishing over on the north, short-lived but nice. I'm just trying to think, other than that, I mean, we're going back a little bit, you know, we're trying to remember it all. I had a charity do. That was it over at Ashmead with Keith Jenkins and Mark Walsingham, who runs the place. Old Chris Yates was there, an old, you know, angling legend, isn't he? But yeah, it was good. There was 3 or 4 guys, they'd paid a lot of money for the charity and what have you, so I had a couple of anglers to look after and that. One of them had a real nice one, had a 32-pound common. And I got quite lucky myself and managed to winkle. I had 2 actually, I had a little mirror. And I caught one, it was an old friend, one I'd caught in the past, like, you know, so I've done quite a lot of time there back in 2014, 15 sort of thing. But one called JC's, short for Jesus Christ, because it doesn't fight a lot, and whenever someone's got him at the net, that's normally what, like, Jesus Christ, like, you know, they thought it was a tench. But 39-pounder, you know, which was nice, you know, just a little charity do. I wasn't ready to stop fishing, you know, but at that time a book was on my mind, and it sort of started to, it was hard to get into anything, you know. Autumn was pretty much setting in by then, winter was on the way. I knew I had loads and loads of work to do on the book, and so that was pretty much it then. A little bit of barbel fishing in between and that to keep sane, but yeah, stuck into the book. Oh, it went on for weeks and weeks and all, you know, loads of writing, but yeah, in front of the old fire, you know, and when it's cold outside, you get into it, don't you? Once I'm into a chapter, I treat it just like my fishing, you know, I love it. Basically, mate, the idea was to get as much done as I could through the winter so that I was free again come spring, you know. In an ideal world, I was able to be free from sort of the end of February, do you know what I mean? But it went on a little bit longer, and well, we all know what happened then. Like, you know, then the COVID thing struck. When was that? March the 23rd, I think we got locked down. But to be fair, I was talking about it with a friend for 2 or 3 weeks before that, you know, and you know, just imagining that if we got locked, I don't think any of us believed that it'd affect fishing, did we? You know, even if we were locked down, I think we still imagined, well, it'd be all right fishing, that'd be ideal, we'd be away from it all, you know. And like, I wouldn't say I was hoarding, but every time I'd gone to Tesco's for that 2 or 3 weeks prior to it, you know, I was stocking up on unperishables and that, and I'd been cooking up casseroles and my usual chilies and all the rest of it, you know. I was imagining hiding away on a lake somewhere, hunkering down and that, and just keeping away from it that way. But, you know, travel restrictions and all the rest of it soon put a stop to that plan. Through the winter, I'd had 2 waters in mind for the coming spring, both really with an April start, you know. One was a lovely chalk pit, quite a big pit up in Bedfordshire. The other one was another big pit, but in the Cotswolds. And at that time of the year, sort of March time, I was yet to walk either of them. And my plan had been to do that in the spring, sort of April time. I'd been busy writing, like I say, through the winter, you know. But then once that COVID struck, you know, and we were locked out, it was awkward. Normally, I think most people would have known what they were doing when we was able to roam again. Do you know what I mean? And I didn't. I had no picture of either water in my mind, you know, like nothing to go on. So it was quite hard actually, that first lockdown. You know, it's quite frustrating because when we was released, which none of us knew when it was going to be, I still didn't really know where I was going to go. I was torn, I was yet to make my mind up. And when we was eventually allowed out, the Cotswold water opened up, but only on a days only basis. And obviously 2.5 hours from home, that sort of wrote that one off pretty quick. All right if you're local, but days only, you know, that was no good for me. And the Bedfordshire one, like most waters, there was loads of extra restrictions, do you know? Booking system, you know, limited amount of anglers on the lake, you know, limited swims, you know, and all the usual stuff that follow, track and trace, and yeah, every time you open up the padlock, all of that sort of stuff. And to be honest with you, I wasn't really feeling it. You know, it was still a bit early days as well with the COVID thing. You know, we'd all seen like bizarre videos from China and that, people dropping dead in the streets. None of us really knew, did we, just how bad it was going to be, you know? So I think we were all being a little bit careful, the fisheries more than anyone. And rather than sort of going straight back into it, I thought I'll give it time to settle down. And I ended up, we won't talk about it too much, but I went somewhere sort of local to home and pretty much camped over there for a few weeks until it settled down. Really, really hard lake, only caught one. We might well go on to that one in a future one years down the line, but that one's a little bit of a quiet one for now. So yeah, mate, what with all the COVID stuff going on and that, it was early July before I headed off to Bedfordshire, my first trip, first week in July. And it was nice actually, by then all the mad rush had died down, you know what I mean? I turned up, I think on a Monday or Tuesday early week, and there was only one person on the lake. It was lovely, sunny and that. I haven't mentioned what the lake's like yet either, you know, it's a deep chalk pit, very different to anywhere else I've fished in the past. I've fished lots of deep waters but not chalk pits, you know, and this was so clear the water looked blue, hence its name, the Blue Lagoon. Surrounded by chalk, big white cliffs and what have you, you know, just completely different. But my first trip there was only one person on the lake, and parked up, went for a walk round, and the wind was blowing into one bank. Lovely shallow margins. And imagine like the wind was lapping in and it's chalk banks, so there was a little bit of a milky tinge in the edge. Anyway, within no time at all, I found half a dozen fish. I've only been there about half hour or so, you know. But this bank that the wind was lapping into, there's a little bit of chalky coloured water going out, and further up to the right, there was like a yellow strip that ran its length. And looking at it with a choppy water over the top of it, you'd think it was clean. You'll know what I mean when I say the big S, very similar to the yellow strip that you'll get on the big S, you know. So automatically you think, well, that's a nice clean strip. And I've seen half a dozen carp cruising up and down. It's a long bank, it's a couple of 100 yards long, but they were only on a very short section of it. Long story short, I was pretty much fooled. I'd thought that this yellow ground was clean. I've got my kit round there pretty quick. As luck would have it, I even had casters with me as well. I already had them just in case I should get a chance like that in the edge. Crystal clear water, they were perfect for it. So remember, I set a rod up, thinking that I've got a nice yellow clean strip of ground, and I tied on my lead, tiny little short hook link and that, which was the mistake. Like, you know, I should have had a longer hook link and a rotor rig maybe, but I put on a little short hook link, tied the lead on, and as soon as I got the chance, like I say, it was a short strip of margin, they were going left to right, and as soon as they were sort of at their end of that patrol route up to the right, it's high bank and you were in full view, so I had to wait till they're outside, crept down the old bank and lowered in. I had a little bag on as well, and that sort of dulls the drop even further, doesn't it, you know, when you lower in. But I lowered in and there's wind and that lapping it. As I've lowered in, I thought, that wasn't as good as I thought, but it's all in a hurry. Do you know what I mean? I've got to get out of there, like, so I've got up the bank, laid down everything. But I'd got some casters in around it. And the next time those fish came through, they dropped, spiraled down, went straight down on those casters. I was only in about 3 or 4 foot of water. But yeah, probably about half hour or so has gone by. At one point, one even flanked in about a foot of water. Whenever I got a chance, I'd put out a few more casters with the catapult, but it was into the wind, so some of them had dropped short on the shallow ledge, you know. But one even flanked and sent up a big cloudy plume, and I thought, how have I not got one? But when it all died down and the wind settled and the lake went calm and that, and I walked, the fish disappeared, and I walked up to the edge, that yellow strip was actually a layer of, you'll know about it, living in Oxfordshire, onion weed. And it just looked different to Canadian. You know, Canadian's more of a darker colour. You know, so you had that yellow strip, I'm thinking it's clean, but it wasn't. It was onion reed and my rigs were buried. So the very first trip I had a really, really good chance. And, you know, it was hard to know at the time what fish I was looking at, but in hindsight, one of those fish was the big one as well.
So I bet you were kicking yourself a bit, mate, after finding them pretty much straight away.
It was a mega chance. For your first trip, you know, it's exactly what, you couldn't have hoped for a better chance. If it had happened second or third trip, then maybe I might have nabbed one, do you know what I mean? I might have already been a bit more knowledgeable about the area where they was. For a low stock pit, there's not loads in there, and that trip I saw them showing out in the open water as well, but it's deep, really deep. That bank I was on was the shallower bank, which is like 20s, 25 foots, like, you know. The other bank goes down to 40 odd foots. Very open as well. Bedfordshire is, isn't it? You know, it's quite open landscape. You know, that was another thing that made it different. It was lovely, big open meadows with skylarks and that, really, really nice. But windswept. You know, a 10-mile-an-hour wind there is like a 20-mile-an-hour wind on a lake in Surrey, for instance, you know, like really open. But I'd see fish out in the open water, but trying to feel for drops and that when you're fishing into, you know, a crosswind, and presentation was just awful. You know, very quickly I sussed that. You'd get a drop, but then when you come to reel in the morning, it was all dripping in silky weed, you know. I think it was like a blamongy stuff coming off the bottom. I'm convinced that half the time he wasn't really fishing out there. I'd actually seen a video as well of, like, that the divers took, so I haven't even got to that yet. You've got divers, yachts, swimmers, all sorts on there, loads of other problems. But this video that the divers took, you could see it was like you could imagine a hinge stiff link, for instance, just poking up off the lead. It wouldn't surprise me if that's how that old big one had been caught 2 or 3 times and a pop up off the lead in amongst fine weed, you know. But yeah, the other things with it as well, you know, most lakes, especially that time of the year, height of summer, and it was hot, you know, regularly 25 degrees and that, it's all about dawn, isn't it? You know, like red hot days and that, it's open there, you're really baked in the sun. But it's all about that morning period, and the thing is, so you'd get everything set, you know, evening time, you get all your rods out and you're all buzzing, waiting for first, you get up at first light, put the kettle on and that, and then you'd hear splash, 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 and there's like a dozen swimmers coming around, and the route they took was right over the top of your hook baits. It was just, that was the sort of range that you fished at, and it was the exact, there was buoys around the lake, so obviously you couldn't really go too far past the buoys, but the buoys was the route that the swimmers used, you know, so that made things difficult. Although saying that, there was occasions when I'd see those fish show immediately after the swimmers went past. So, you know, they were used to the swimmers. But on top of that, you had divers. They wasn't quite so frequent, but they'd come out often late afternoon, evenings, and you'd have to reel in when the divers was out. You could track them going around the lake, like big bubbles coming up and what have you, you know, and there was loads of snags in there. It's basically a flooded pit, and there's all sorts in there, like skips and boats and sheds and God knows what down there, you know. There was one story, the owner actually, Jay, had told me that he talks to the divers regularly. He said, oh mate, he said, honestly, he said, that last time that big one got caught, he said, like, one of the divers reckons the day after he see it sitting in the shed. He said he went, there's an open door in the shed, he said it was there, looking at it. That's probably his snag, you know, after he's been caught. So yeah, you've got the swimmers, you've got the divers, and to make things even more difficult, you had yachts on there as well. And they'd come out, especially evening times, you know, right up until dark, you know, and You could leave the rods out while the yachts were out, but still, none of it was ideal. Basically, it's a really, really busy shared water, and you just had to fit in as best you could around it. I mean, I didn't do a great deal, mate, you know, it was just through July, 3 or 4 trips. And I saw plenty, like I say, I'd had chances both far out and close in, you know, like I'd got a good window into what it was all about. But there was one trip, I'm pretty sure it was the last trip actually, Jack, the cameraman, actually popped in that trip. But that's well worth me talking about because it put me in good stead to what happened this spring. It was hot. Really hot, and the previous trip I'd seen them showing over deep water, really deep, 40 odd foot, but I kept seeing them showing, you know, when you're watching from the other side, so you're lined up, you know, and normally if you're watching a show in deep water and they're not on the bottom, then they won't be all on the exact same spot, you know, they'd be scattered, but these ones I was watching, they were dead tight, you know, and I thought, well, you know, all of my experience tells me that they wasn't feeding on the bottom, not in that depth, they couldn't have, but they were so tight I thought it was worth a try. But anyway, it was while I was on that bank. To be honest with you, after casting it, you could have a cup of tea while the lead's going down. Do you know what I mean? You cast that, just wait forever. Once it's gone for a few seconds, you know you're not going to catch, don't you? You know. Anyway, we'd done that night, and Jack was actually under a brolly in the swim next door. And first light in the morning, Jack actually popped into me. He said, "One just jumped." I'd seen it myself, to be honest with you. I'd heard it lock, stood up, and you're right at the water's edge there. And it was deep, like the water there just drops away into blackness, really deep. But I'd seen it show just to the left, which was in front of Jack, and as I'd stood up, I'd actually seen bubbles. It was blowing bubbles, it was coming towards me, so much so it was coming right into me. It was only showed about 2 rod lengths out, but it was coming in at an angle. And I sat straight back down again, because you're right at the water's edge. And as I sat back down, it came past within less than a rod length from the bank, and went off to the right. And just try and explain it. This bit where I am, I'm halfway along the track bank, and it's very deep, like a steep shelf straight in front of me, but immediately to my right, this yellow strip started, a bit like on the other bank that I described earlier, and it got wider and wider as you went up, and then eventually you hit the end of that bank, and there's like a little bay there that's all shallow, like, oh, it looks like it's 2 or 3 foot deep, but it's probably more like 6 to 8 foot, do you know what I mean? It's that clear, it's tap. Anyway, so I've stood at the front of the swim, I've seen this trail of bubbles go past, I know it's obviously a big fish, and he's gone up he's obviously over that yellow ground. This is first light in the morning, and I've seen 3 or 4 more shows. So it was all a little bit hasty, and I've moved quickly. So me, every drop. Moved round onto this back bank. Long story short, I've had a good lead around that morning, and couldn't find any spots whatsoever. It was like all the ground where you wanted to get a drop, you couldn't get a drop until you got into 20 foot. And then it was clean, and then you know you're not catching nothing there anyway, you know? Like where those fish are shown, it was too weedy. I'm in a plot now that I really feel like I've done a wrong un, I've moved and I shouldn't have moved type thing, you know, it's wrong. But later that same day, I was stood at the water's edge and one's come swimming past, a good un, like, you know? And I've just kept still, and it swum past me, and then gone up onto the yellow, the real shallow ground, and I've got the shallow bay to my left, and it's gone, I've watched it go all the way across the shallows and disappear in the far corner of the bay. A little bit later on that afternoon, I've seen another one do it as well, this time from a little bit further out gone in, so there's at least 2 gone into this bay now. There's probably a little bit more to it, because an old friend, remember Toll Pits that I fished years ago? Well, a friend, Nick Lindsay, I hadn't seen him since Toll Pits, and I'd met him that trip, and he'd caught a couple before I'd got there, it's on the blue. And one of the ones I'm pretty sure the 2 fish that I'd seen swim into that bay that day were the 2 that Nick had caught a couple of days before. You know how it is, sometimes, just like I described with the shed, like out in the lake, sometimes they have a snag or a little area where they like to go, don't they, especially after they've been caught, like a safety bit. And either way, it was significant, you know, it was worth sort of logging in the brain, you know, and I'd gone round there, had a look and that, but that time of the year, heavy foliage, summertime, dappled light and that, I couldn't see them in there, but I knew they hadn't come out. So it was logged in there, and it wasn't until this spring that I sort of put that to good use.
So with it being mainly a very deep lake tail, but with shallow margins, crystal clear water, had you kind of set your sights on catching it in the edge? Have you ruled out the deep water?
No, it was a complete open, I had an open mind to it, like, you know, and basically I just fish wherever the fish tell me to fish, you know. Otherwise, on a lake, on a big pit with a low stock, otherwise you could be fishing blind an awful lot of the time if you're just guessing. And, you know, often we'll relate to something somewhere where we've previously fished, you know, and use your watercraft that way. But you can't beat just letting the fish tell you, you know, and if the fish are in the edge, then I'll fish in the edge. If I'm seeing them showing out in the open water, especially at dawn, you know, first thing, you know, they're more likely to be out in that deeper water, then I'll fish out there. But like I say, presentation was hard work, a lot of weed out there and that. You'd be surprised though, the depths that I was reeling in food. I've just picked that up out of 30 foot of water. And even at that depth, well, for a start you've got weed growing, but on top of that there's loads of little baby zebra mussels in it. So if they're down there, then there's no reason at all for the carp not to be going down there too. Besides, I see them topping out there last week, so. But 30 foot's deep for me. I think the deepest I've ever caught a carp at is 20, 24, 25 foot. And that was a chalk pit not too far from here, Elstow too, long time ago. Only a little one, but deepest I've ever caught a carp in before. I've not caught about 30 foot. So it's all a bit new for me. So there was plenty of food out there. It's just at that time of the year, sort of July and that, you really don't expect them to be feeding in that depth, do you? I mean, like I say, mate, I didn't do loads, you know, it was just through July. And I remember as well, on that last trip, I got heat stroke. Like, you know, we had real hot weather and that, and I don't know if I mentioned it, I said to you about all chalk cliffs and chalk banks. Well, I'm sure it must have reflected off of the chalk, you know, because I didn't, you know what it's like, you know, it's lovely and sunny, I'm out there in shorts and that, lovely in the sunlight, but I overdone it. And I remember going to bed in the evening time, like before it was dark, like, you know, I didn't feel right. And I woke up, cut around into the dark, and you know, and you get out of the bag quick, you know, and I was sick. I think the next day, actually, yeah, the following morning, I came round pretty quick, so I see a big display and then ended up moving. But that was my last night over there. I had nothing, caught nothing. The following week was forecast even hotter, 30 odd degrees, and I think I just thought better of it. It wasn't that either. We were sort of at the start of August by then, almost at the start of August. You know, it's like August comes, September's just around the corner. It's when you start thinking about autumn, isn't it? You start thinking ahead. You know, you start getting a bit of cooler weather. And I knew I couldn't be there in the autumn. I had a lot of work ahead of me with the book. So yeah, I think I just thought at that stage, right, let's knock it on the head, like, you know, we'll go back next spring. I did do something though, I did do a bit more fishing before I cracked on with the book. It was hot, like I say, though, for that next couple of weeks, and I went over Frimley, done a bit of floater fishing. Perfect water for floaters, you know, there's loads of carp in there, a lot of big ones and that, you know, got them going really well. They were buggers, that's right. Yeah, the very first trip I caught one, a nice mirror, like, quite a rarity in there because it's sort of 90% commons, isn't it, you know. Second day that I went, I caught another one, a good one as well, a 36 pounder. In fact, I'll tell you the story of that one because Dad was fishing. Dad does quite a lot of work over there, he's one of the bailiffs. And he was working through the daytimes on the lodges. They were putting cladding up on the new lodges that had gone up. And he had his kit left in the swim. And I was round actually with Dad. Dad was sat with me. I was round there by the lodges and I put in floaters out and they're drifting off down the lake and they just happened to be, there was like a bar, you've got an island, anyone who knows Frimley will know what I'm talking about. It's where everyone fishes to from the most popular swim, double boards. But from where I was drifting these floaters on the wind, a few of them were going round the back of the bar into a swim known as the Noddies, like where Dad was, not that he's a noddy, but like where Dad was fishing. And yeah, Dad sat with me and he said, anything taken out? I said, not really, like, you know, just the odd one, but they're in front of your plot, like, you know. So well, I ain't fishing, like, you know, I'm telling you all this so you don't think I'm a poacher, like, you know, I'm explaining. But yeah, Dad said, go round. He said, I'm not fishing until this evening, I'm going out the shop anyway, like, you know. So I went round into Dad's plot. They're still taking the odd floater out there, and you know, I whipped out, and it was so, the cast didn't go quite right. You got the bar there, and I wanted to be right close to it. They were supping them, basically in the shallow water, where it come up shallow, and they were supping floaters in, and it landed just a little bit short, and I was just thinking, oh, should I reel that in? And as I'm looking, it's still settling. The controller's still, it was all still settling, there's the floater, and I just thought, what's that? It was almost like a rudd, you know, the tiniest little, and I thought, that was mine, wasn't it? And as I'm looking, and then you see a wallop when he was on, and it's quite a confined area. You've got a lot of pads and that up to the right. Dad had actually walked back in at that point as I've hooked it. I'm in, Dad, like, you know, so he's helped me out with the net, but I just kept it up on the surface, walked backwards, and I had it in the net inside. I bet it was in the net inside a minute, like, you know. In fact, it was that lively that while I was getting all the camera kit and the scales net ready, Dad was holding the net, it broke the landing net pole. Dad pulled Dad in seriously, like, you know, the pole, it exploded, almost climbed out of the net, and Dad jumped off the jetty, like, to try and save it, like, but it actually broke the Lands net pole. Not one of ours, like, you know, like, you have to use the Frimley nets, like, you know. But yeah, 36 pounder, a nice scaly one. Like I say, there's a lot more commons in Frimley than there is mirrors, but I'd seen a shot of one the previous winter at 39 that was a real nice one, like, you know, and it was that fish. You know, of all the fish in there, if I could have chosen one of the mirrors, it would have been that one. It's one they call the silver mirror. I said earlier on how they were real tricky on the top. They were hard. Like, you know, that day I'd caught one that day, one the day before, and the third day more floaters went down the hatch than ever. You know, like, I had a dozen or so fish just taking them non-stop all afternoon. I couldn't get a bite, and that was like dropped down to size 11 barber looks, 10 pound double strength. I think it was probably to do with the hook baits wasn't quite right. You know, sometimes you can be too buoyant or not buoyant enough, and yeah, I've gone through all of the different floaters in. I've got a badger here at home, so I feed my badger dog biscuits, which is quite handy because in the process I wanted to find out the best floaters, the best dog biscuits for a hook bait. Because the floaters I feed are expander pellets, you know, like a koi pellet, but they blow, don't they? You know, like the bigger ones of those, like the 11mm ones of those. I don't know if you've tried to use them for an hook bait. You can put one on a needle, but they blow very, very quickly and soak up too much water. Whereas a dog biscuit, you'll probably get 40 minutes out of it or something, which is ample for controller fishing. But yeah, I'm actually looking forward to going back this summer. So who knows? Maybe we'll do a floater one, and this time I've definitely got the right hook baits. Maybe I'll get me revenge.
Yeah, you've probably got a bit rusty on the floater fishing tail. It's not something you've done a lot of in recent years, is it?
I'll show you, Rusty. We'll be doing a floater fishing film later this summer. After that, I'm telling you. You know how it is, mate. You know, I'm trying to think when the last time. But I'm only going to prove you right, aren't I? Do you know what I mean? It would be Nutsy, wouldn't it? Nutsy and Christchurch. That was both the same summer, so that sort of makes up for our two targets. What was it? Yeah, the Test Valley Mirror and Petals, and that was floater fishing.
Early 2000s?
2000, be 2002, that'd be. About then, yeah. What it is most, now I'm going to sound like I'm making excuses, but no, a lot of the places that you fish, they're snaggy and that, you know, if anything, the fish have got bigger and all, fishing for, you know, if you're fishing, targeting a 50 pounder in a snaggy, weedy lake, most of them are floater fishing. Not all of it, but most of it is with a lighter hook link, you know, and you're feeding them little floaters. If it's a weedy situation, a little tip, like, you know, sometimes if you get them going on floaters and then put out a few bits of bread, you know, once you're using a bigger hook bait, a bit of bread, then you can use a bigger hook and maybe 10 pound line straight through, like not a pre-stretched line, 12 pound line or something. Do you know what I mean? You can do it. But yeah, nowadays, mate, the main reason I don't do as much floater fishing is simply because I don't want to lose them. I don't want to lose my target fish, you know. I think when you look back to places like Christchurch and Nutsy, you know, they had a lot of carp in. You know, they both had upwards of, well, I don't know how many were in Christchurch, probably over 100, like, you know, so there was lots of carp. So at the end of the day, you were carp fishing hoping for a big one, and it just happened those, yeah, I managed to nab them on the floaters. But I'm going to put you right on that. I'll show you I ain't so rusty on the floaters.
So going into the autumn tail, I guess it was full steam ahead on your book.
Yeah, by then I had a lot of the drawings and that back, you know, the maps and all the rest of it. I just knew, yeah, it was time to get on with the book, like, you know, and it's a good job I did as well, because there was a lot more to do. You always imagine how much you got to do, but there was a lot more than I thought. So yeah, mate, it was a long old winter, wasn't it, you know? Not a lot of fishing. I'll tell you what, though, I kept the old pre-bait going in. But I had that pretty much wrapped up, sort of end of November sort of time, and that gave me time. Well, again, the COVID restrictions and all that started coming in, didn't they? You know, there was always something to slow the pace, wasn't there? You know, something to get in the way. But I managed a few trips over Frimley, probably worth mentioning because I caught my biggest ever common, and coincidentally enough, 48 pounds 7 ounce. So that was in February. But coincidentally enough, that was on the exact same date that I'd caught the parrot, my biggest ever mirror, February the 23rd. How mad's that? The book would have come out, that was launched, first week of December, was it, around then? And I was at Frimley then. I'd sort of watched, that was it. I've done my bit, like, you know, now it's all your job, like, you know, the distributors. And Yeah, it was funny. You obviously heard about the old server that crashed, like, you know. But when I'd first started laying the book out, sort of a few months previous, I'd been going up there. It was all the way back and beyond of Essex, like, you know, that I had to drive. And the lads at the publishers, they had a new server. Giant great thing it was, like, you know, big tower, everything all shiny black, with like strobe lights going across it, wires, you know, it's like something from NASA, do you know what I mean? And they were really, really proud of it, like, Thames, what do you reckon on our new server then? Like, you know, I mean, it was like that, you know? So like the first I heard of it, you know, you can imagine that day when I think the book had launched at midnight or something, wasn't it? It was a strange time. And then I've turned the phone on in the morning, mate, the phone's just going text and all that coming through and everything. Oh, I can't get you putting it. And I learnt about it then, like, you know, but it was funny. I had like Nige text and that, and he was like, oh, mate, I bet you're well annoyed and all that sort of stuff. And I was sat there laughing, you know, like I'd done my bit, you know. I was fishing, I was concentrating on that, thanks very much.
So with the book out of the way, Tel, I bet you couldn't wait for spring to arrive.
Yeah, just looking forward to getting back over the blue. You know, I'd had all winter thinking about it. I'd had a good insight into it the previous year, and we had a better starting time as well. You know, this year, because it was still the COVID restrictions and that, if I remember rightly, it was March the 29th or something, we could do nights again. That or it was the travelling, like, you know, they were saying I lose track. But certainly from the end of March, I was free to go back to Bedfordshire. Remember, we had a cold start, didn't we? It was cold, you know, the first week, I missed the first week of April, it was that cold. And like I said earlier, Bedfordshire is an open, windswept place, you know, it was a little bit nippy. April the 12th, and the snow's actually settling. Man, come on, spring. I mean, more than anything, mate, it was, you know, like it always is at that time of year, it's just a case of keeping a close eye on the weather, you know. And the last thing I wanted to do was drive into Bedfordshire, fishing, because when I was going for 3 nights at a time, 4 days, you know. So I didn't want to go all the way to Bedfordshire, do my 3 or 4 days and then shoot off home just as the weather's coming good. I wanted to be there for that first good window. I didn't have my first trip till the 8th of April, so I waited a week or so. And even when I did go, it was only because I couldn't wait any longer, do you know, the weather was still cold. Like I said earlier, it's open, windswept place, you know, cold winds on there, deep water as well, not ideal, you know. But that first trip, I saw 5 shows. When they show on there, they're all over the gaff, but it was deep, you know, I was fishing sort of 25 foot, and in April, it's not exactly ideal, is it? You know, everything was telling me I need to be shallow, but it was too cold to be seeing fish shallow in the margins. So your only choice is out in the lake or maybe zigs. And on a lake that deep, that'd be suspended zigs, and for reasons outlined earlier, I'm not too keen on fishing for a 50 pounder with 10 pound double strength and a size 10 hook, do you know what I mean? Something I've not yet mentioned as well is, it's quite disappointing, but through the winter there was otters on there. They'd done at least 3 of the carp, the second biggest for definite. Those were just the ones that were found, you know, and bearing in mind you were starting off with a low stock anyway, do you know what I mean? The second biggest was gone. One of the other known linear-y nice lookers was gone, another 30 pounder. You know, it was all a little bit up in the air whether the big one was even all right anymore, do you know what I mean? But as a result of that, it was quiet that first trip back. There was 2 lads, Gary and Matt, they'd both been doing a little bit. They were 2 of the regulars, do you know what I mean? But everyone else seemed to be keeping away. I think everyone was a little bit unsure whether the big one was there or not, you know, whether the otters had done it. Now, I said to you about how I really didn't fancy fishing that deep water at all. You know, first trip back, I didn't have much choice, like, you know. And I already mentioned that shallow bay from the previous summer where I'd seen a couple of fish swim into. Now, at that time of the year, April, you know, anyone who's done a lot of carp fishing, you know, it's all about the shallows, isn't it? That's where you're going to be looking, like, you know, the 20, 30 foots, no chance, like, you know, the only chance you've got there is up in the water on a zig maybe. Other than that, it's going to be in the margins or in the shallows. So that, and that lake is probably 20 acres or so, you know, that was the only area that really fitted that description, you know. And all the way through the winter, whenever I'd looked at a Google Earth image, my eyes were always drawn straight to that shallow, yellow, glowing bit. So basically, from about the middle of that track bank, going all the way down into the bay, there was a shallow strip of margin close in, and it got wider, eventually going all the way into the bay as you went, like, you know, or narrower from the other direction, depending on what way you walk. That bit there, on that very first trip back, the water was always tap clear there, but it seemed especially tap clear, you know, and you've got quite a high bank on that trap bank as well. The swims were set down lower, but there was, you know, you had a high bank above it, you could get a better view in, a few little gaps in the bushes and what have you. What happened, the second trip back, I'd been keeping an eye on the weather, close eye on the weather, and we got that sunny spell that I was hoping for. In fact, it was better than that. It had been sunny over the weekend. I don't generally fish over weekends. I went on the Monday. And we had a northerly wind, and then it turned to a northeasterly, which was even more in my favour. Like, you know, so although I'd missed the first couple of days of sunny weather, it was only getting better for when I arrived at midday on the Monday. And I've turned up at the lake. I even set off an hour earlier than I'd originally planned. Like, you know, I was well keen. And I got there was only one person there. It was Gary, like, you know, good angler, Gary, you know, Gary Atkins. He's been really unlucky. In fact, he's caught half of them, hasn't managed to catch the big one. But Gary was there, and he was where the wind had been blowing over the weekend. He'd said he'd seen them about and what have you. But as I got there, it was just starting to change. It was blowing down to the end of the trap bank. I said, well, I know where I'm going. I want to go down the end of the bank. And Gal even said, he said, mate, he said, to be honest with you, he said, you've turned up at the exact perfect time, the right time, like, you know. So I've walked up, left Gary to it, like, walked down the bank, and I've got to about the swim that I fancy. Remember, I've been Google Earthing it. Although I haven't been doing a lot of fishing. A lot of fishing's done from home now, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? Technology's that good, you know? So I knew where I wanted to be. And I've left my car, walked down there, walked into this open swim, and crystal clear water. You've got yellow going out for probably 15 yards or so, and then it drops away deep. But even over the yellow, it's 8-9 foot at least. As I'm looking, I've seen two coming in, and they're coming straight at. They look black in that water, jet black, you know. And that bank's all slowberry bushes all along that bank, other than the gaps where the swims are. So I stood up the top, but using the slowberry bushes as cover. As soon as I've seen them coming, I've just sort of stepped round, like, you know. They've come all the way. They're only that far below the surface, and it's about 8 foot a rod length out. And they've come all the way, missed all the yellow stuff, gone straight over the top of it, and then dropped onto choddy ground, but 3/4 of the way up the ledge, really high up the ledge. And a little grub, the water was that clear that when as soon as they imagine them facing you, and they both tilted and dropped at the exact same moment, like they were joined, do you know what I mean? They were one and the same, like dropped at the exact same moment, they're facing me. And as their lips touched the bottom, it was that clear that you actually saw it puff up around them, do you know what I mean? And then they had a very short grub about for a few seconds, and then off that, and they ambled off to the right. I thought, I know where they're going. They're going into that shallow bay, like, you know. I walked down there, I couldn't see a lot going on in there. But after seeing that, I thought, well, this is where I'm doing the night. You know, it's afternoon by this stage. I can see lovely, I'd eyed it all up the trip before when it had been cold, and there was loads of bits that looked to me turned over. Whether it had been or not, I don't know. But at the time, I suspected that maybe they were coming in at night. Shallows, the rest of the lake deep. You've got to think, even in the daytime and they're out over that 40 foot, they ain't down in 40 foot, they're up in that 40 foot, you know? And at night time, in those situations, quite often, they will drift in onto the shallower ground at night. So anyway, it was choddy where those fish had fed, very briefly. So I've chose the nicer looking bits, which I can see little white stones and flecks and that at the bottom of the ledge, about 8 foot. Lowered in 2 rods, separated, tigers, had the old casters with me, like, you know, so I broke open the bag of casters and put about half a pint in, split between those 2 rods. Nothing's happened through the night. Got up first thing in the morning, and like you do, you know, it's like you keep checking the weather, don't you? You know, like every half hour I'm looking at the weather. Can't believe it is. It's definitely got the wind's going to come in. It's sunny. It was the day before I'd seen fish, so and then the next day was forecast even better. Well, it wasn't until about 11 o'clock in the morning the first ones turned up. And I thought, well, no, where they're going, same as the day before, they're going into that shallow bay. I've missed a little bit here, but it doesn't matter, I'll bring it in. Just prior to that, only half hour or so earlier, on one of my walks up and down the track, I'd already had a very good look in the bottom of that bay, and the light was better in the morning. And I'd sorted out a good tree as well, the tallest tree on the lake. By that time, I've already earmarked 2 spots in the bottom of that bay. There was a branch poking out from the bank, and off the end of it, it had clearly been fed on. If there was anywhere on the lake that I had 100% no doubt in my mind that carp had been fed, that was it. It was only about the size of an unhooking mat, but there was all little white bits turned over. You could see they'd fed there. But that was an awkward spot to get a rig. Do you know what I mean? You could underarm one to it, but you know it's like when fish are actually, I'm not going to put a rig in that bay until I see fish there. And in that situation, I'd like to be doing it a bit more stealthily, if you know what I mean, with the weight like creeping when they're not looking and we'll lower one in. So I've got this one spot that's clearly a banker, and then you've got this little reed bed, a couple of rod lengths closer in, almost right underneath the tree where I'm at. And over the top of that was a little bit choddy, but it just looked another nice spot. So half hour or so before those fish turned up, I had that half a bag of casters, only broken open the one bag the day before, like, and I'd used half of them, so I've got about half a pint left. And they're turning a little bit on the dark side by then. That's worth mentioning for something that comes later. So I've put them in with a catapult light, you know, and that half of them are on that spot off the end of the twig that comes out, the spot that looked best but hardest to get a rig onto, and the other half I put them just over the top of the reeds. So that's before I've seen those fish come in. So now we'll go forward again a little bit, and those fish have appeared in, and I'm running down about, I've got ahead of them. I've actually grabbed the camera off of my bed chair, the little video camera. Got up the tree just in time as they're coming in. You'll have to excuse it if it's a little bit wobbly, do you know what I mean? I'm trying to hold a camera and hold a tree at the same time. But they've come in, you'll see them on the footage, but they come in two black shapes. At this point, I don't even know what ones they are. They've come in, and the very first, they come all the way to the first caster spot. Again, confirmation that was obviously a spot they regularly fed. They've come in all the way. As soon as they got there, they're fucking straight round, and they were on it, like, you know, you see it in the footage. And it was only at that point that I realised one of them was the big one. I could see its width. Remember, the second biggest has gone. The second biggest was about 38. The bigger is generally around 50, 51 pound. So there's nothing else in the lake as big as that. It's clearly the big one. And I filmed them for, I don't know, it felt like 5-10 minutes to me, but it was probably a minute, do you know what I mean? I was keen to go back to the swim and get a rod ready, you know, which I did. Got down from the tree. I think I even say on the film, just to let you know what you're looking at, Jack, like, this is the big one, and another one feeding on casters, like, you know, and then a few seconds later I'm like, that's enough of that, mate, I've got to go and get a rod. So gone off, got my rod set up, all the way back. Remember my very first trip, I was tied on a lead, little shuttle link. I've done exactly the same thing, identical rig, little caster cluster, just like I've used for the little grey and what have you, you know. I've got everything, I've got my waders on now and all that. Got back up the tree before getting the rig in, like you do. Got up the tree, and now the fish aren't on that further spot. They're there just over the top of the reeds, and now two's turned to three as well. A common's there. There was a mirror, might have only been an upper double, but had a cluster of scales low down, quite recognisable, and the big one. And they're twisting and turning now. I'm absolutely loving those casters, like. But it was one of them. Now I've got to wait for an opportunity, like, you know. So the rod's at the bottom of the base of the tree. It's got a bag hooked on it. It's all ready to go. Buzzer's pushed in, the net's there, and that all set up. And I'm in my chest waders waiting and waiting. Eventually they've moved out a little bit. They might have gone all the way out the bay for all I know. Once they were 10 yards away, that was my chance, like, you know. I'm down from the tree, waded out. Now the bottom in the blue, because it's chalk, it milks up ever so easily. And I'm sure you've been in this situation before when you've waded out and get a rig in. It was one of those where you wade out, and as you're wading out, I'm eyeing up. I'm lower down now. I'm a rod length away from the spots, like, you know. So you're getting extra fussy. You know, where do I want to put it, like, you know. And but at that same moment, the clayey water's like ballooning and rolling out. Do you know what I mean? So I've got to be quick about it. I've got to get a rig in, otherwise I'm going to lose visibility. And I tied the lead on. Now that's where I want to put it, right there. And just one last little tidy up and a clean up before I lowered in. I don't know about you, but I always smooth the air bubbles out of my lead core. So I've just dunked it, wetted it, and then, like, you know what I mean, it just makes it darker, like, you know. And I forgot that I tied the lead on, like you do. I'm holding the lead when you do that, and dink, the lead's come off in my hand, and I'm in the, you know what I mean, in the water, like, oh my God. So I've jumped out, I've like crept out, like ran back to the thing with my rod and all that, and I'm tying on another lead quickly, and I'm actually kneeling down at my bed chair facing the back of the brolly, you know, and the water's right behind me, and I'm quite high up, slowberry bushes, you know, a little bit of cover. And as I'm tying on a lead, the sound, mate, it was like, well, it was right next to me, it was a rod length from me, do you know what I mean? But one boomed out, like, so loud, and I've spun round, stood up at the same time, looked, and I'm looking straight down and seen it come out again, come out 3 times in the trot, the big one. So, like, remember, when for me to even attempt to get that rig in the water in the bay, which is a little bit down the bank to my right, I'd had to wait for the fish to move out, and now they're where I've done the night. And after seeing one bosh, I think, well, they've got to obviously eat me casters, like, you know. If it wasn't for that clear water, I would have stayed there. I would have blown out the bay probably and thought, well, they're obviously on my bait here. But because it was tap clear, they wasn't feeding. Like, you know, even though they've jumped, I can actually see, I've seen that one when it's gone back down and then righted itself and then come out again from like several feet. Unbelievable sight, like, you know. But they didn't drop. You know, and there was 2 there, not just the one that boshed. And I've seen them amble off. I know where they're going again. They're going up to the bay again. Now at that same moment, no car has been down. No, I'm the only one on the lake, like, you know. And at that same moment, I've heard a van rumbling down the track I'm fishing, you know, and these fish are close in. I've looked, it's Jay, like the owner. Lovely, bless him, he brought me an ice lolly, do you know what I mean? A nice pop and a cold drink, you know? But as he's turned up, I'm literally about to run the rod back down. I said, Jay, mate, I've explained very quickly, like, you know, mate, like this is he said, oh, well, you know, you like, I said, mate, I've got to get it in now, like, do you know what I mean? I've got to get this rod in now, like, you know? So I've left Jay with me kit, ran down there, this time it's all gone smooth, like, you know, a very quick look from the tree, they're not there, not about. Got in the water, lowered me rigging, and it wasn't that the bottom actually had a little fine flower of brown, exactly the same colour as the lead core, which was nice, like, you know, but it was a browny layer of fluff. And I lowered on that bit, perfect. Saw the hook links only that long, seen it settle, bonk, perfect. A few more around it, and like I said, those casters have gone quite dark. They're still sinkers, but they've gone dark by now. And you know how I like my caster clusters? I have one of those little pale ones in the middle. It's a perfect sight bob, isn't it? You know, there I can see it, like, you know. So even with loads of freebies around, I knew exactly what one was mine. Come out there, rod on the buzzer on, all the rest of it, nets in position. Quickly walked back to Jay, and at that time, oh, that's it. I'm just trying to get all the story in, like, you know, because it was exciting. I've gone back to Jay, just as I start tucking into my old ice lolly, one's boomed out in the entrance to the bay. It's come out 3 times again. I bet I only glanced towards it. I know it's the big one. Like, it's just jumped out 3 times here, you know. Jay's actually stood up, like, you know, it's 950 pounder, you know what I mean? And then literally within seconds of that, in the distance, coming across, it's all open fields around it, lovely meadows. And there were some trespassers coming. You get a lot of kids around there, like, you know, they like swimming in there and all the rest of it. And Jay's seen them, gone, oh, I'm interested. He said, I better go and chuck them off. And I don't think Jay realised just how close in I was fishing. He's gone rumbling down the track slowly, like, you know. I've followed, I've got back up the tree, and there's nothing on view to begin with, you know. I'm thinking, like, well, they've obviously pushed out, you know, maybe where he's driven past. And also as well, at that time, the clouds came over and all. You know, at that time, it's only April, remember? And, you know, I'm only in a t-shirt, like, you know, and the wind started to pick up, it went a little bit cloudy, got a little bit chilly, you know. I was thinking, oh, yeah. And I kept looking off to the right, and I could see Jay's van parked about 100 yards away, where he's just kicked off these couple of trespasser youngsters, like, you know, but I'm thinking any minute he's going to come driving back, isn't he, you know? So I'm at the tree looking, I can see the bottom for a good 20 yards, all the way out to the entrance of the bay, tap clear, and then it drops away dark. You'll see it in the footage, just how clear it is. There's nothing on view, I can see the bottom everywhere. And as I'm looking at the corner of my eye, right down there, there's a little bit of overhanging trees. I'm in the bottom of the bay, and I've seen one, it's the big one. Like, you know, I've looked down and the big one, he'd obviously been under the trees up to the right, and I was unaware of him. But I'm just hugging the tree as tight as anything, like, you know, oh my God, don't even want to breathe. And he's come around all slowly. He's probably in about, I don't know, 3 to 4 feet of water, but he's about a foot off the bottom, crystal clear. He's come around all slowly, and he's got, like, almost to where the casters are, and you actually saw the body language change. You saw that, you know, the old tail's all slow, and all of a sudden it has a little bit of a flicker. Do you know what I mean? And it curled like that, and then he dropped. And he's obviously eating casters. And I said earlier how the freebies that I put in were darker. You know, they'd open it. They were still sinkers, but the one on the, like, you know how I make my caster clusters with a little bunch of casters all glued together, a bit of foam on the underside. Well, the one in the middle on the top, I always pick out one of the creamy coloured ones. You know, it acts as a sight bob, you know, not just for the fish, but in this instance for me as well, because I could see that from the tree. I could see my hook bait easily, but I can't see the free offerings. So anyway, he's gone down, he's that far from it, from my hook bait, and he's tilted up. And the old gills are going and that, he's obviously chewing a mouthful of casters, you know. And then as I'm watching, he's finished off that mouthful of casters, obviously, and then he's tilted back down, just inched forward that last, only that far, you know, 6 inches or so. He just inched forward that last bit, and I actually saw, I'm looking at my hook bait, and I actually, you stop breathing, you know, and I see my hook bait go into its mouth, gone. And I tell you what, mate, there's my hook link. I don't keep many hook links, like, you know, but that's the actual hook link that I caught him on, and I wouldn't have had it an inch longer or an inch shorter. It was absolutely perfect. You watched as soon as he tilted his head, bang, he shook his head, and before that buzzer had even, I've got chest waders on and I'm up the tree, you know what I mean? But I sort of half fell, half jumped out the tree. Just as my feet touched the floor, the old buzzers broke into life, like, you know. He only had, I don't know, 3 or 4 yards before I picked the rod up. And where he's in such shallow water, he wallowed on the surface. Big fish as well, you know, in shallow water. On the surface before he's got his head. And now he's got flat rodded me, and now he's having line off the clutch. And the last thing I want is for it to drop, go out of the bay. You know, it might be at the entrance of that bay, it wasn't 8 foot, like, you know, say 7 foot or something, but then it drops away into silly depths, and there's rubble on that along its length. So, and I'm low down in the water, like, you know, he's having line off the clutch, and I'm thinking, like, I'm pulling the net forward as you do as you're wading out through the reeds. I'm grabbing the net, and I've managed to stop him just short, luckily. And at that same moment, I'm wading out and I've walked up the margin, because there's the odd branch that I earlier mentioned that's poking out my margin. So I've walked up, and now I've got him, stopped him short of the entrance, pumped him all the way back, and I know exactly what I got on the end, remember, like, you know. And at that same moment, I've heard Jay's van driving around. How close was that? If he'd driven around just to, honestly, mate, it was so close, it would have spooked. Jay was unaware, do you know what I mean? Jay's the nicest bloke in the world, like, you know, he didn't have no idea, and I didn't want to say anything, you know, but so anyway, so I'm playing it. Jay's like, there's a little gap where he's going to be able to see me, and I thought he's going to see me, like, you know, and as he dropped level, the old brakes came on, like, and he's got out, and of course he's got the phone on me, like, you know, which is handy. We've got a little bit of footage playing it. Mega battle, exactly what you'd expect, a fish of that sort of size in shallow water. It's mad, like, every time, it was real powerful fight, but there was at least 2 or 3 times when it hit the surface facing me, but not sideways, sort of upright, do you know what I mean? And it'd face me and it's coming towards the net, and I'd get the net in position, and then he'd power back down at me, like, and then the tail would come. One time it brushed past me waders, like I've had to get the net out of the way, do you know what I mean? He's brushed past me, actually hit me legs. Anyway, eventually into the net he went, like, you know, and Jay had already said once while I was playing it, like, you know, is it the big? And of course I'm focused, like, you know, I haven't said nothing, but Jay's asked again, is it then, is it? Yep, got him, mate. There he was.
Is it her? Is it her?
I waded in to where Jay was, asked him to hold the pole while I sorted out a few bits. And I must have had a lot of adrenaline going, like, you know, because I poked that old pole in like I always do while I get everything ready, leave him in the net, you know, and an angle well up in the air. And I've poked the pole in, and a little bit later when we come to pull that pole out, none of us could pull it out, mate. So we need the pole to weigh it. It was like whoever can pull this out is like the Excalibur of the carp fishing world. So like, and we had a northern lad with us. I think his name was Steve. Oh mate, the effort he was having that pole out, no matter what. He was thinking. I know what was going through his head. He was thinking, if I pull it out, I'll be the next one to have it. Like, you know. But it was some effort, mate, to get that pole out. I tell you, how it went in that far, I don't know. Ain't that strong? Do you know what I mean? Brilliant. He's got it. Well done, mate. Well done. Right, let's go. Swings and roundabouts, isn't it, with this big carp game? I think back to some other ones, and Chertsey would be a good example. You know what I mean? I think that was my 50th fish or something. There's only 25 in there. Like, you know, I had to catch them over and over again. And then other places, you know, first bite. 49.2, I would say.
Sounds good to me.
But I've got to tell you, if it was going to happen like that anywhere, I was quite glad it happened. It could have turned into a grueler, mate, being honest with you. You know, it's not an easy lake. You know, even more tricky with after the otter retention, you know. Less carp in the lake and what have you. Could have been there a long time. How's that for a touch? Big enough, isn't he? I look at a couple of the other lads, you know, Gal. You know, I don't know, I think Gal must have got 7 or 8 carp out the lake, you know, he's doubled up on a couple on that, you know. I really hope he gets it, real tryer, do you know what I mean? There was another lad there, Matt, like, you know, but that's just how it happens, you know, you can't really pick and choose them. But in the situation, it was perfect. Imagine there was 3 carp there to begin with, but when I actually had the bite, it was only the big one, you know. If those others, if all 3 of them had come at the same time, there's every chance that it would have been one of the other ones, and you might be there 6 months later, still at it, fishing in the deep, fishing, you know, doing all of your thing. So it's a fine line in carp fishing, isn't there? Proper chuffed.
Great stuff, Tel. So what have you got planned next?
A bit of floater fishing, I think. Just glad to get it back, do you know what I mean?
Well, we all knew it would happen. It was the situation. Cheers, mate.